Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Deemer, and I'm here today as an ambassador for the Protect Accent campaign. The Protect Accent campaign project is about empowering and equipping businesses and organisations and individuals to promote equality and diversity amongst their workforces in order to eliminate unlawful discrimination, unconscious biases and stereotypes. Thank you all for joining me today. Just in terms of protocol, if I could ask people to put their microphones onto mute, if they're not talking, that would be much appreciated. Then we can just cut out all the background noise. Thank you very much. So the aim today is to promote acceptance and inclusivity by influencing positive behavioural change. And we do that, we try to do that through education and by providing empirical evidence that is necessary to enable organisations to be truly representative of all sections of society and their customers. And for each employee as well to feel respected and able to give their best at work. So welcome to this webinar, which I'm delighted to host today. And this is going to be a conversation. So there's no PowerPoint presentations. So we won't bore you to death with lots of slides and pictures and various other things. The idea is to have a conversation, and I'm absolutely delighted that I've got three good friends and colleagues with me to join me in that conversation. And we're going to ask them to share their wisdom and their knowledge and their passion about this subject with you today. But we want you to join in the conversation as well. So there is a chat box. So those of you who've used Zoom before, hopefully will be familiar now with the technology. There is a chat box. We would encourage you to put some questions in there or comments or thoughts. Doesn't have to be a question. But something which just might stimulate the conversation. So the idea today is to explore, firstly, what accent discrimination is, to then talk about how it manifests itself, and then crucially to look at what impact, if any, this might have had on particular groups and communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will join in the conversation, as I said. We're planning to have a conversation for about 45 minutes. And then I'm going to hand over to my friend and colleague, Goodie, who is the founder of Protect Accent, for her to tell you about her plans for the future of the project, and for her to formally close the webinar. So without further ado, I am going to ask my three guests to introduce themselves. And when they introduce themselves, I'm going to ask them also just to briefly talk about what accent discrimination means to them and why they think it's a subject that needs to be discussed. So I'm going to begin with Siobhan. So Siobhan, I want you to, first of all, tell us where you are in the world, because in this virtual world now that we live in, you could be anywhere. Tell us who you are and what you do. And then, if you wouldn't mind, give us some initial thoughts about what accent discrimination means to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name's Siobhan Corria, and I am an ambassador for the Protect Accent campaign. Recently joined. So my job is Head of Inclusion for Action for Children, which is a UK-wide charity. It's been going for 150 years. My role is really around making sure that we have an inclusive place for everybody to work, with the main goal around improving outcomes for children by being able to be your full self, bring your full self to work. So that's my role. I think accent discrimination is around negative perceptions and stereotypes around an accent or accents. And that then means that people are negatively behaving towards an individual because of their accent that they perceive to be a negative thing. And I guess I hadn't really thought very much, even though I've been in this job for 6 years, I hadn't really thought very much about accent discrimination until I met Goodie. So I just think, firstly, you know, just to say thank you for raising this issue, because I think, particularly in the UK, accents can be seen as a funny thing. So I've always thought that people think very warmly or negatively around accents in the UK, but not really any deeper than that, not any deeper than actually how does that affect people in the workplace? How does that affect them when they're applying for jobs? You know, how does bias really stop people from progressing within the workplace and within life, really? So I think I feel I'm at the beginning of the conversation around accents at the moment, and I'm really self-conscious now how I'm speaking. Make sure everybody can understand, because Welsh people do tend to talk quite fast. But yeah, they're my initial thoughts, and it'd be great to hear from everyone else really about what they think.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you, Siobhan. And you're absolutely right. I think it's one of those subjects that people, when they first hear the phrase, if you like, accent discrimination, people will recognise it and they'll think about it, but they won't go much beyond that. So I think, as you say, what Goodie's done with this campaign and this project is absolutely fantastic. And we were talking earlier actually about the blog that people might have seen on LinkedIn, that Reg Amoa has posted recently, and has had loads and loads of interest. And I think it's really interesting how you know, a simple, you know, short piece from him about this subject has generated obviously a lot of interest and a lot of thought in people. So thanks for that, Siobhan. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to ask now Gamil, if you wouldn't mind, same questions really. So tell us where you are in the world. Introduce yourself to us, tell us who you are and what you do, and again give us some initial thoughts about what accent discrimination means to you. And I hope you've unmuted yourself.
Big sort of error. Well, good morning to you and good morning to everybody else. And firstly, I met Goodie probably about a year ago. We met up, sort of just have a brief discussion around this that seemed to go on forever, because this is a topic that really hasn't been touched. You know, I'm based in lovely Milton Keynes, so in between London and Birmingham, but I'm a born and bred Brummie, and I'm very proud of my Brummie heritage. Although, as you've probably gathered, my Brummie accent has disappeared over the years. However, my mother's Glaswegian and my dad's from a lovely place called the Yemen. So in terms of accents, we had lots of different accents. And growing up as a child, I can remember going to Glasgow and being teased constantly for my Brummie accents. And then watching my dad be teased and discriminated against because of his accent. And also, you know, sadly my mum passed away at Christmas, but all of her life, even though, you know, Glasgow is, I would say, compared to most other places, Glasgow is just up the road. But my mum was always made, you know, fun of because of the fact she still had her Glaswegian accent 60 years after leaving Glasgow, and it still had an impact. But in terms of myself, I was very fortunate that I was sent to a lovely place called the Yemen when I was 12, and I couldn't speak a word of Arabic, so I had to learn to speak Arabic. But I could tell by not just the facial expressions, but also the punches and the kicks as a youngster from people that found me different, Part of that because of my accent, part of it because they saw me as being from the West. It took me about 1.5 years to actually integrate into, we're talking about kids. We're talking about, kids that we would have thought hadn't have, developed their biases towards people. But it took me 1.5 years to actually, once learn how to speak Arabic fluently, but also to become part of the community. It takes a long time. So some of my lived experiences as a child, and obviously being of mixed race, coming back from Yemen, I had quite the opposite, because when I came back from Yemen, having not spoken English for 2.5 years, I had a Yemeni accent. And yeah, that was quite interesting. One, in terms of, finishing my schooling, because I got back at 14.5. Two, when I left school, in getting a job, and that was really difficult, but you push your way through it, but you work 3-4 times harder than other people because of your accent and because of various sort of elements of your identity. So to me, our accent is part of our identity. Every single individual has an accent. It's just that some accents are more favorable than others. Other accents give you loads more privilege. If you've been to a university and that university teaches you how to speak, or you work for the BBC and you have this way of speaking, you're taught how to speak when you work for the BBC. So all of these are privileges that have been developed and given to people. But our accents are who we are. And, when we talk about bringing our whole selves to work, if we can't bring our accents to work, then we're not bringing our whole selves to work. You could say, well, how come your accent has changed? Well, firstly, by the age of 20, I moved down to Bournemouth. And from Birmingham to Bournemouth, I can remember my first day there. I stood at a bus queue, and I said, like you're in Birmingham, you say hello to everybody in the queue. And these people literally walked away from me to the end of the queue. And I thought, is it my accent or is it something else? But through working in publishing, my accent changed, not consciously, probably unconsciously, to actually ensure that I got the future that I wanted. But that was hard graft, whether consciously or unconsciously. So I'll stop there, Paul.
No, thank you, Camille. That's really useful, and we'll talk a little bit later about that intersectionality that we call it, around accent and how it interacts with other aspects of personality and being, which you're starting to mention. Can I just ask again, if those people who aren't speaking, if you could put your microphone onto mute, be much appreciated. And we can then just avoid some of those background noises that we sometimes get. Having said that, I'm going to ask our third panel member to unmute herself and join us. And again, Udi, welcome. And I'm going to ask you the same 3 questions, if you wouldn't mind. If you could introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do, tell us where you are in the world, and also just give us your thoughts, your learned thoughts on accent discrimination.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction, and Goodie for inviting me to be part of this. Gosh, where do I start? Goodie Okechukwu, Professor of Diversity, University of Bradford. I am in Bradford for a change. I have friends who are saying, I thought you would be locked down in Timbuktu, but no, I'm locked down here in beautiful Bradford. I think most of you have talked about your relationship with this subject, and Goodie, can I just share something that Goodie will be so proud of? This all started in the MSc Diversity Management class. In our cross-cultural module, when Goodie said, Prof, I want to look at accents. Gosh, that would be excellent, because most people don't even see that part of life. So Goodie, thank you very much for keeping it going, for your resilience around this, because even the supervision of the essay was in itself a real challenge, and we worked together to get there. So in terms of accent is me, you know, because there are things you can actually hide. You can't hide your accent. I've tried as hard as I could. I'll tell you a little story. When my kids joined me, so I came here to do my PhD in 1992, and my kids joined me about 1996 from the beautiful country, Nigeria. So kids were young, and they decided that they were going to be completely bicultural. So when they're talking to me and dad and family members, it was the real Nigerian accent as I'm speaking now. But when they pick the phone and talk to another friend from school, it was a proper Yorkshire accent. I had to ask for an interpreter, because they'll say, hello, Sarah, are you there? Have you heard me? And I'm like, what are you talking about? So that adaptability was really important. So accent for me is the way I speak. The sad thing and my experience is that people often forget the content of what I say and decide to work with how I say it. So many times I get to a point where I open my mouth, I'm talking, I've not even got to the end, and I'm just sorry. And I'm like, if you listen, you know, you'll hear and understand what I'm saying. So I think there are things that go right before you. And I think for me, accent is that big thing. So I'll give you an example. As somebody who is in academia, I came to this country, did my PhD, and came straight into teaching in a university. It has been really challenging at times. So I start my session by saying to students, we are going to negotiate our relationship in this process. So I will try my best to speak so that you understand me. Your role is to listen and be patient enough to hear what is in what I'm saying, rather than just discarding the content of what I'm saying because the accent may not be familiar. So accent bias is something that I see time and time again. When I used to do some clinical practice as a nurse, that was a real challenge, because the whole essence of it has been, she opens her mouth, I won't understand her, and I just wait for her to say a few words and I'll say sorry. And that can be really, really frustrating when you know you have a lot to contribute in any conversation, but you're trying to just get people to listen in the first place and accept that the content will be great. So I'm really thankful to be invited to this, and I will expand more as we go on in the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Udi. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for those people who've joined us as well. And again, just to remind people, if you wouldn't mind putting your microphone onto mute. So those of you not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of the screen, you've got a little microphone there, and if you can click on that, just click on mute. It just avoids all of the background noise. So Udi, I think you've taken us into an area I'd like to explore, which is whether accent should be a protected characteristic. So, you know, in this country, we have an Equality Act, and there may be people on the call not from the UK necessarily, but in terms of the UK, we've got an Equality Act, and we've got a number of protected characteristics under that act, whereby people have legal protection. I wonder what your thoughts are, the three of you, around whether or not it should be protected characteristic. I'm going to go back to Gamil, if you wouldn't mind, for your first thoughts on that. And you are on mute again, Gamil.
You wouldn't believe that I do about 7 calls a day on Zoom. And honestly, most of them are unmuted. I have mixed views on this. I think that organisations, and part of this is because of what we've seen, particularly over the 3-4 months since COVID started and then Black Lives Matter. What I'm starting to see is organisations becoming more proactive. I don't really think the Equality Act has helped massively, and partially because there is no, there's no governance, there's no sort of, nobody's going to tell you off if you don't do things. And I would rather it come from businesses. And now that we've got this window of opportunity where, chief execs are actually talking to you, whereas before you would have, you would have sort of, diversity, D&I managers, directors, HR. I've had calls from, chief execs. I've had calls from chairs of boards. And that's when you know that things are starting to happen. So for me, I would rather organizations instigate the change and have it as part of creating a culture of inclusion that incorporates any form of adverse disadvantage. So I'm not quite sure whether having it as a protected characteristic would make that much difference. But I think if we incorporated it into the work that organizations are doing, and then it's more likely to impact. But we've got to start the conversations. When I Googled, foreign accents, disadvantages, etc. There's hardly anything, I was really, really surprised at how little exists. There's lots available around regionalized accents in the UK, but very, very little about anything else. And that told me a huge story. And it told me that we're not talking about it enough. So,
okay. That's really interesting. And it's interesting in the chat box, Reg has made the point about the hierarchy of accents as well, which is the sort of territory I think we're getting into. Siobhan, what are your thoughts around this?
I think my thoughts are mixed as well. I think in a supportive way, I guess, it's around human dignity, something that people shouldn't be compelled to change. It's really important, is people's identity. But just on the other side of things, I agree around how much has the Equality Act actually helped in terms of, inclusive cultures within organisations. And I guess one of the activities that I do quite a lot in workshops in Action for Children is around, right, let's list the protected characteristics. So we have a list here, and then we have a list here of things that aren't protected. And the list of things that aren't protected is always longer than the list of things that are protected, which is really interesting because in some respects, people's thoughts around discrimination and people not being treated fairly is a lot wider actually than the 9 protected characteristics. So for me, it's not about yes or no should it be a protected characteristic. We're at the beginning, I feel, of the conversation and the journey. So I think it's a bit more around, let's talk about this more. Let's see, something I'm quite interested in is what type of bias is accent discrimination or accent bias? What type of bias? And I sort of think, when I was sort of thinking about accents, I was thinking, just relating it to my upbringing, my mum used to watch a lot of soaps. So we used to watch them with her when we were growing up, when we were kids, but she didn't like EastEnders. She liked Coronation Street and she liked Brookside. So I've got a warmth and a fondness for those accents because I grew up around them watching the telly basically. And it's just really interesting because I'm thinking, when we're thinking about accents, that you do warm to people sometimes more often. So actually, is the bias conscious? Is it unconscious? Is it around actively discriminating? I think it's about taking that time to reflect, not just on accents, but on people's behaviour. and their perceptions and their stereotypes. And I'll just give one more one more example. But I was on a shortlisting panel about a year ago, and somebody that we knew, somebody internal, applied for the job, and he's got the broadest Cardiff accent, one of the broadest, probably as broad as my dad. But the director said, oh, this person's applied, they're the wild card. And I said to her, well, he's not the wild card, is he? I said, you're thinking he's a wild card because he doesn't fit the stereotype of this particular role. So actually you need, and I could only say that to her because we had a really good working relationship. She was the director, and she said, oh God, you're right. She said, yeah, I've got to take myself away from what I perceive him to be and the job, and, you know, just go completely open-minded. Well, he got the job because when he went into the interview, he was amazing. But actually, had I not challenged her back on that, he wouldn't have got the job. So, and a lot of that was to do with his accent and perception of, you know, working class. Can he do this campaigns and policy job? Because there is a stereotype around that. And he's doing great. So.
No, you're absolutely right. And I loved your comments about warmth of accent. And I saw the comment earlier from, I think it was Fiona, to yourself about how much you liked your accent, Siobhan, which I thought was a nice compliment. So thank you for that.
That was very nice. And I just have to say that NASA's accent in Gavin and Stacey is not real.
Okay, it's probably a whole webinar there on that, I suspect. So we wouldn't open that can of worms. Right? So Udi, I know, you know, a lot of your work is global. A lot of your research has taken you to different parts of the world. So what's your thoughts about this whole idea of protecting accent? And I'll be interested as well to know, you know, what does it differ in different countries as well? Will that help us in this debate, do you think, to think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of international work, and it's so fascinating to just, I look at it as creation, that people can come at matters from very, very different perspectives. And I go into conferences where people use assorted accents, and how beautiful. Can you imagine the world where all of us spoke the same way? Oh my God, that would be so boring. I think it would be worse than COVID. So I believe that there are two areas of work. The equality work, I think, is embedded within legislation. And I don't think we should even be saying, I think we need to look at the other part, which is about negotiating and valuing the difference that we bring together. So there are countries for me that do better than other countries when I go to these places. I remember attending a conference in Tokyo the other year, and we had people from all over the world, and it was so fascinating to hear the chair saying, we are so, I think, so lucky to have so many voices coming around this table. What we need to do is to use this as a way to teach ourselves patience. I don't like tolerance, but they said tolerance. I would say to teach us how to accept, and just listening to people. I mean, just it's the thing that we need to do. And I feel very strongly that sometimes we lose sight of those little, we see, I would see accents bias as a little thing, and racism is the massive, but we forget that that's part of racism as well. So I think Paul, just answering your question, my experience across the world is that there are places where people are more accepting of difference than other places. So I give you an example of going into a conference in San Diego, and I was doing a talk, and many people who came into that room have the same, please, this is about equality and diversity, and what we need to do is actually listen to each other. And that some of us are going to speak very slow, the others are going to be very, very fast, but that's what makes it exciting. And one man saying to me, well, I'm sorry, we are in an intelligent academic discourse here. and we don't want people to be unintelligent about what they're doing, which was really exciting because it took me in a different direction to define intelligence and why the manner of speech would define intelligence any better than any other stuff. And I asked this man, I said, have you ever thought of the fact that the way you speak might feel the norm, but the reality is that it presents a problem to many other people? And it was interesting the way we went around this to the point where he said, you are right. I said, this is about humility. It's about accepting difference. It's about teaching yourself to be sensitive and to listen appropriately, to hear, rather than listen to criticize or listen to say sorry. So that's a roundabout way of saying some places are more tolerable than other places. But I have seen where people listen more and are more sensitive to the people around them, they do better. And that is what I would always promote, that we get to that place where humanity is about listening to the little thing that people tell you, rather than trying to look at that big picture, and that big picture being about how posh you speak.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. So let's take this into that area that I mentioned earlier about intersectionality. So let me ask the question again of the three of you, and I'll start with Siobhan this time, if that's okay. Do you think that accent is disproportionately linked to race? So is it more prevalent when it comes? So is accent more prevalent when it comes from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic person? Is it more noticeable? Is it more impactful? Should we say?
I think it's,
yeah.
I think it's more about how many different people have come into contact with. So I think it's more around, you know, if you haven't come into contact with people who are not born in the UK, then you're going to struggle to understand that accent. But it's not about the person whose accent it is. And I don't think it's about actively seeking out to be negative about an accent. I think it's the lack of experience, it's the lack of contact, and therefore it's the lack of understanding. However, having said that, that is what leads to racism. So I think it's definitely intertwined, it's definitely linked, but I think it's around lack of experience and lack of contact more than anything else. But then where does that lead in terms of people's views and behaviour? So I'd like to, think a little bit more around the next stage in that sort of intersectionality issue.
Okay, thank you, Siobhan. Camille, what are your thoughts on this? If you could unmute yourself and share with us.
Thank you, Paul. Intersectionality is such a fascinating area, and it's stuff that I know Udi, myself, yourself, and loads of people have been exploring for years. And you know, accent is another addition that will create not just biases, but have a negative impact on people. And, you know, just for those of you that aren't too familiar with intersectionality, it's literally where the differences in our identities collide. For example, you know, we know that all of the stats show that women are discriminated against compared to men. We know that if you're a Black woman, you're doubly discriminated against. If you're a Black woman with a strong accent, you can add a third on. If you're a Black woman with a disability, that's number 4. If you're a Black woman who just happens to be lesbian, or that's a 5th. And you could go on and on and on. And that's discrimination, not by the same people, but by different people. So the numbers of individuals who discriminate against you grows and grows and grows, because those individuals will either not like your accent, not like the fact that you're female, not like the fact that you might be Black, etc., etc. So in organizations, we're talking about the big topic of the moment is racism, systemic racism. And systemic racism, yes, you're discriminated because of your race, but you're also discriminated against because of your accent. And as for those of you that haven't quite picked up on the systemic racism, you will hear so much more over the coming months about how every single individual is racist to various extents. And, and the fact that we don't do anything makes us complicit. And you'll hear lots more terminology around anti-racism. So you're either racist, you can't, or you're not racist, but if you're not racist, then you're not doing anything. You have to be anti-racist, which basically means that you suddenly become an ally and a champion. And, around the conversations that we're having at the moment, I'm talking about racism or accents from, globally, but it's more likely to impact on you if you are Black, live in Newcastle and have an accent. So it doubles up or quadruples. Does that?
It does. It does. Thank you. It does help. And excuse me if my eyesight is veering away. I'm trying to watch the chat box as well. And I just wanted to thank people for their comments in there. Richard about his Yorkshire accent, and Jane as well about Northern Ireland accent as well. So thank you for sharing your own experiences as well. So Udi, I know you've written about this subject, and I know I've heard you talk about this subject as well, of intersectionality. So what's your thoughts about this in terms of specifically in relation to accent and race? And you'll need to unmute yourself, Udi. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. When will we learn? Yes, I think the issue of intersectionality is very important, and Gamil has talked about the piles and piles of, as you're becoming more plural in your visibility or not, then you have more challenges. So I always start by saying to people, I'm sorry, I'm a plural creature, and therefore the way you interact with me have got to take that on board and understand that I cannot get any of those aspects of me because that's who I am. So my significance is in how these aspects of me comes together to create who I am. So just looking at the specific issue about do I think that accent and race would come together more to challenge people, I'd say by all means. So back in, I think, 2013, I did some work with a colleague in Hull, just looking at Black African-born nurses and their experiences. The big thing that came out of that study was that African nurses had this triple jeopardy of being Africans, Black, being women, and above all having accents. And the challenge they had was that the racism they faced based on these things coming together, the multiplicity of these things, meant that they were being hit at from all angles. So it wasn't just patient to nurse, it wasn't just nurse to nurse, it wasn't just manager to, it was all over. And accents become that rallying point that people could use as an excuse for being mean. There's some work that has just been published as well. It's fascinating work done by colleagues in the United States, Kechi Hedru Anderson, looking at accent bias, a barrier to Black African-born nurses seeking managerial and faculty positions. And I just want to read one or two narratives, because every time I read things like this, I'm like, are we in a world that sees us as humans or what? And it is the intersection of being Black in a foreign country that produces this. So this nurse said, if you are a Black nurse from a foreign country and you have an accent, you get it really bad in this profession. People don't respect you. They think you are stupid. They make fun of you. Somehow it's like coming from Africa makes you less human. So there is a racism in our profession towards people of color, but Black nurses with a foreign accent have it really bad. You spend so much energy repeating yourself and explaining yourself to people. It is mentally exhausting. So we are looking at a combination of factors that come together to exhaust a human being who turns up for work to save lives. So that multiple discrimination is very, very, very exhausting. And I really think about how that dehumanizes as well. So it takes you 3 times more to do one activity as compared to your white counterpart, because you've got to deal with these layers and layers and layers of being human. Now, I can give other quotes, but that for me really grabbed my attention around how multiple discrimination can work, and accent adds to that.
That's really helpful. Thank you. That's really, really interesting. And that takes me actually into sort of almost our final area, really, which is the challenge. So you've talked there about the professional impact of accent, but what impact do you think it's had during COVID-19? Do you think as a patient or as patients, certain communities have perhaps had greater impact because of their accent? Has accent had an impact, a disproportionate impact even, in relation to COVID-19? So Gamil, I can see you're chomping at the bit there. I'm going to bring you in. If you could unmute yourself and share your thoughts.
Sadly, it's an incredible time for everybody, you know, in terms of the impact of COVID on the lives of so many people. And, you know, so many people have lost so much, but also so many people have been deprived of services. And this cuts across every service. And we know that, you know, we know from research that if an individual with an accent is zooming in with an organization, then they're more likely to be cut off or got rid of a lot quicker because of their accents. I mean, I do loads of research, you know, and we run loads of focus groups, and I get all of my focus groups transcribed. And most of my focus groups are with individuals from ethnic minorities. And I have to go back to the transcribers so many times because they miss out information that I know is valuable because I ran the session and I know it's really valuable, but because they struggle with accents, rather than taking that little bit more time, they will, you know, just ignore it. And that has an impact on research, and it has an impact on information. It has an impact on feedback in terms of what we get. But we know they're individuals. You know, we all know from the news that ethnic minorities are disadvantaged in so many different ways. You know, sexual violence being one of the biggest. And in terms of reporting that, you know, individuals are less likely to get the support that they require. 1, if they're from an ethnic minority background, and 2, if they have an accent. So,
okay,
I could go on.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. So listen, I've got to leave at this point because in the interest of intersectionality, I've got to host another webinar in 15 minutes on LGBT issues for my organization. But I'm very, very delighted that we have got Goodie with us. and I know she's there because we were talking to her earlier. So I'm going to hand over, if Goodie could show herself on the screen, just so I can make sure that she's there, and I know she is.
Hello, I'm here.
Here she is, here she is. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Goodie. So Goodie, you know the question that we're dealing with at the moment, which is about COVID-19. We've had a contribution from Gamil. I'd like to hear from Siobhan and Udi as well. And I'm going to say goodbye at this point.
Thank you, Paul.
Just thank you for involving me. Thank you to everybody for your comments. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the recording. All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. So I'll go over to Professor Achibong. What is your take on the last question? Do you have any more thing to say?
I just want to be illustrative because I've had this conversation in the past. So during that COVID, we still have it, but there was a time that we thought the world was coming to an end. So what happened was I have actually used this as an analogy, especially when we noticed that Italy was actually prioritizing who gets what. So I said to a friend of mine, I said, can you imagine? There's one ambulance, but there are two people who need to be picked up. One clearly says, I have respiratory problem, and it's really clear. And the other one is trying to say, respiratory problem, can't breathe. Where would that ambulance go to? And I did ask that question, and this friend just said to me, you know, your mind goes really wild. And so because I was trying to look at the reason for overrepresentation and differential impact of COVID on certain communities. And I actually use this as a joke to say, I'm really sorry, you have no chance. If you have somebody who is not patient enough to even hear what you're saying, and they're just listening to hear that voice, that language that is not familiar, with an accent, trying to speak English in a way that they feel is funny, they're gonna go somewhere else. Now, I am not for any reason accusing anybody of anything, but I'm just telling you what would happen. So Gamil has already talked about overrepresentation and differential experience of COVID and impact on Black, BME populations. So there has been instances where people, when you already have a very debilitating, you're vulnerable, it even reduces your clarity of speech. So if you think about how that is linked with accent, and you are in that bed, and remember during COVID, everything is speed. And when we have speed of action, speed of intervention, then we become a bit sluggish, and we get really irritated when things are not smooth. Health professionals, you've done fantastic work, but I'm just giving that as an example of why it would be a real problem, and it has been real problems. When in America, we lost a nephew, and that was born out of the fact that the guy had just arrived in Houston about 7 weeks before COVID, called the early response or acute response, and the individual said, I can't understand you, I'm not, and that guy was in that mess and died about 6 hours after. So we have had those experiences, and they're just somehow pragmatic reasons, but there is an element that I cannot let go, is the fact that if we think some human beings are better than other human beings, we are going to mobilize our resources to support the people that we think are better than others. We need to be in a world where we are all human beings. Let's return humanity to wherever and whatever we do. And then we will all be great individuals. But sorry, it might sound very philosophical, but it's also pragmatic because it is real. Racism is real. And I can see how it has impacted on the groups with accents more than the others who we define as being clear in how they tell us what to do and where to go.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Achibong. Now back to Siobhan. Siobhan, do you think that accent has had an impact on COVID-19 in the way that people are responded to when they make that frantic call for help?
Yeah, I think more broadly, COVID-19 has highlighted the inequality that exists within the UK. And I guess specifically around access to healthcare. So, you know, accents preventing people from being heard, from being able to fully explain themselves. But I guess the one thing that I'm thinking of in terms of that could be specific to accent is around how people have become targets of hate crime or targets of behaviour in the street, for example, or in the shop, where people, you know, are blaming people from BAME backgrounds for COVID or not wanting to catch COVID and all that sort of stuff. And I guess an accent is something that you can pick up on without seeing that person. So I think that's something I think that would be quite interesting to look at in a bit more detail around how people have become targets of hate crime and discriminatory behaviour because of Black and Asian minority ethnic people being disproportionately affected. So it's sort of, it's a systematic effect for people, and then it's the community aspect as well. So it's two hits really. So yeah, I'd be interested in looking at that a bit more, I think.
Wow, thank you for that, Siobhan. So I'm going to bring Ranjit to the podium. He wants to share some thoughts around intersectionality. Ranjit, if you're here, can you please kindly unmute yourself? Let's hear what you have to say. We can't hear you. You are unmuted, but we still can't hear you, Ranjit. Okay, so unmute yourself now, please. No. Sorry, unfortunately, sorry, because our time is going. Sorry, we can't hear you. So we're just going to move on. Put that in the chat box and then we'll talk about that later. Okay, at this point, I want to thank everyone that turned up for this fantastic event. My first thanks go to the panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule. I know how busy you lot are. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. Thank you for the support. Thank you for my amazing lecturer, Professor Achibong. You need to know Professor Achibong. She's amazing. She is amazing indeed. I love her. Okay, and thank you, Siobhan, for coming. Thank you, Gamel. Thank you for Paul, even though he's not here. And I just want to take 5 minutes to talk a bit more about our campaign. You already guessing by now, our campaign is about eliminating accent discrimination in organizations and the broader society. So you probably have deduced from everything that's been said this morning that your accent can impact on your employability, your career progression, your opportunities in life, even in education, in the broader society. So we thought that's not right. We need to do something about this. So we have 3 stages to the campaign. The first stage is to highlight, to reduce, and to eliminate. We are at the very, very first stage where we are highlighting the issues around accent bias. And it goes without saying that we can't do this alone. We need your support as an individual. We need the support of organizations as well. So as an individual, you can support us by becoming our brand ambassadors. In fact, our lovely Siobhan here is an ambassador. Paul Deemer is an ambassador. I'm still pleading with Professor Achibong. She's so busy. Gabrielle as well. I mean, all of them have been very supportive. Even those that are not ambassadors yet, they have been very supportive. So we need more people to join this campaign and elevate our voices and help us get heard in places perhaps that we cannot reach. We also need your organization to back this campaign. We need endorsements, we need sponsorship, we need every help that we can get, because this is something that intersects with all the other elements of discrimination. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you have a voice, you have an accent. I always say accent bias does not discriminate. All it takes is for you to move from the area where your accent is popular to another area, and you become the other voice. So you are helping humanity, you're helping yourself, your children, and generations unborn if you support this campaign. So we need your support. To contact us, really, we have a website, and it's www.protect-accent.com. You can email us at info@protect-accent.com. Find us again on our social media handles, the LinkedIn and Twitter. Thank you, everybody, for your time. We really appreciate this. We're 5 minutes before time, and I don't know if anybody else has anything to say. And thank you for coming. Camilla, do you have anything to say?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for taking the time, and time is valuable, for taking the time to actually attend and listen. And the key to reducing discrimination of all sorts is to listen and learn. And we talk about the power of the single story, and we talk about little knowledge getting us nowhere. The more time we take to understand the different challenges that people face in society, the better that society will be. So thank you all very much, and enjoy the journey. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Archibald, have you got any final words for us?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I think the first thing in this journey is actually to acknowledge that there's a problem. And I'm happy that we all acknowledge there is a need for us to do this. And then the next thing is trying to create spaces where we can have conversations like this. Sometimes it will not be comfortable. And I really thank you that you are part of this journey of having uncomfortable conversations and accepting that some of us will come at personal experiences that may hurt, but because we're all in this humanity together, we can just talk and see how we can heal together. But I guess the other thing I need to say is I think we need to move very swiftly. I know you've got your 3 stages to a point where we are collectively going to say enough is enough. Because I know George Floyd is just a symbol of how racial inequality can really dehumanize people. And I think we need to move very quickly to that space where we are not just bystanding and allowing things to happen. We have to get to a point where we're all going to be challenging, and we're not just challenging individuals, we are also going to challenge organizations wherever we see this happen. So thank you very much, Goodie, for setting us off on this fantastic journey. And I will consider the ambassador stuff, but I don't want to let you down because life is really busy.
Yay!
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Archibald. Thank you so much. I'm delighted. Finally, Siobhan, any final words from you, please?
Just to say thanks for inviting me, and it's been a really good discussion. Obviously, this is just the beginning of the campaign, but looking forward to being involved as much as possible. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Siobhan. And thank you, everyone. On this note, I'll bring this amazing event to an end. Thank you for your time. It is well and truly appreciated. Thank you, and bye for now. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.